In this video, we want to look at the section-specific syllabus for this course. So to kind of start with, my kind of contact information, my office, if you want to physically come to any office hours, is MAS027. I have my email in here. Canvas messaging also works as well. Canvas messaging probably even works a little bit better. This is my office phone number. I wouldn't necessarily call it. I'm not in my office that frequently, so I would instead Canvas message email. Our grade breakdown: exams are worth 62% of the grade. Lab is worth 20%. Quizzes 10%. Discussion boards are worth 4%. And science and action response papers are worth 4%. There'll also be an extra credit assignment that we'll talk about that is worth up to 2% of your grade as well. So let's start with the exams. So exams are 62% of the grade. There's going to be 5 exams through the semester. We have 5 units of content. We'll have an exam after each unit of material. So exams are closed note, closed book, and they require lockdown browser as well as the Respondus monitoring software. So your web camera is enabled while you are taking this, and a video is recorded of you while you are taking that exam. So your exam needs to be completed in a quiet, distraction-free area, no other people in the room. You're not allowed to get up or be out of view of the camera. You can't go get a beverage. You can't go use the bathroom. Those things have to be taken care of ahead of time. So your lowest exam score will be dropped. So 5 exams, your best 4 out of the 5 will count. Your lowest exam score gets dropped. Many of you are already experienced with the lockdown browser and Respondus monitoring. If you're not, I have a practice area set up for you such that you can get comfortable with that before you take the first exam. One of the first things you should do in this course is to make sure that this software is set up and things are working great on your computer, your webcam, everything's ready to go for this. So that's why I have that practice area. It's a place where you can just make sure, hey, did I download the software properly? Is my webcam functioning? So there's no grade associated with that practice area. It just gives you a chance to make sure everything is working out okay and you're not going to have any technical issues. In addition to making sure that there are no technical issues by using this practice area, there's another thing that this practice area does. This practice area also gives you an opportunity to understand how to properly put in subscripts and superscripts in the free response questions, as well as the how to draw a table, 2-row table, in order to show your mathematical calculations. There's a separate video on this where I walk you through how to do that. But that practice area gives you a chance to make sure there's no technical issues and that you know how to input subscripts and superscripts, and you can draw tables for when you start taking quizzes and exams. So here's a link to the monitoring software. In the welcome module, there will also be a link for this. So for exams, you're only allowed the periodic table that I have supplied. You can't use any periodic table you want. It has to be mine. As part of the lockdown browser Respondus monitoring, you would actually show that periodic table specifically to the camera as part of your work environment. The approved periodic table is found in the welcome module. You print that out, and then you're using that on your exams. Laboratory experiments are worth 20% of your grade, and your lowest lab score ends up being dropped. So quizzes quizzes are worth 10% of your grade, there's going to be a total of 6 quizzes throughout the semester, and your lowest quiz grade ends up getting dropped. So your quizzes are taken online in Canvas, but your quizzes are open note, open book. So that means they don't require lockdown browser or respondus monitoring. So quizzes are open note, open book. Exams are closed note, closed book, no resources available. Next thing are the science and action response papers. This is 4% of your grade. So these are brief writing assignments, and they're not research papers. Please do not turn these into research papers. These are meant to be done very, very quickly. They're opinion papers. You're not citing resources. You're not looking up other sources of material. You're going to have a news article that you'll follow a link to a news article, and then you're going to just write a real short opinion paper. What did you think about as you're reading that article or after you've read that article? And they're opinion based. These are short. Even if you're a very slow typer, these should only take 15 or 20 minutes in order to complete. There's no sources, there's no formatting, there's no citations, there's none of that. That's just, what did you think about as you were reading this material? Usually they're less than a page in length. The grading for these is part of your participation grade. So it's credit, no credit. If you do it and do it on time, you get 100 on it. If you don't do it or you try turning it in late, you get 0 credit for that. There will also be discussion boards available. So that's worth 4% of your grade as well. So that's another participation type grade. And these usually end up dealing with the same topics that you did your response paper on. So it's one article that feeds into 2 assignments: your brief response paper that you submit, and then the discussion board where you get a chance to discuss the article with your classmates. And again, this is a participation grade, so there's only 2 scores for a participation grade. You either successfully participated, where you'd get 100, or if you didn't, where you'd get a 0. So for each discussion board, you're required to have a minimum of 2 meaningful posts. What does a meaningful post mean? Well, meaningful post adds something to the conversation. It's not just like kind of bogus quotes or things that you kind of add that don't add anything. Posts or replies such as, "I completely agree." That's fine and all, and that helps serve sometimes as transitions in the discussion board. There's nothing wrong with typing something like that, but that doesn't count as one of your meaningful posts. Your meaningful post adds something to the conversation. Just saying, "I agree," that doesn't add anything to the conversation. Or something like, "Lol, I never thought of that." Well, again, that doesn't add anything meaningful to that discussion. Those would not count as meaningful posts. You can certainly post things like that if you found something somebody else wrote intriguing, but instead put some actual dialogue, some meaningful dialogue in that. There is an extra credit opportunity available. So this is an opportunity for you to earn up to 2% of extra credit towards your overall average. So this extra credit is mentally added by me to your overall average when I submit your final letter grade. Basically, the Canvas gradebook doesn't work well with an overall boost to your average. Any kind of extra credit, it tries to force it into a section instead of just having it be overall extra credit. So when you complete the extra credit and you get 2 out of 2 on it, you're not going to see that change the overall average. What I do is at the end of the semester, when I am doing final letter grades, I basically have your final average column and the extra credit. And if you've done the extra credit and it's a 2 out of 2, I just mentally add 2 points towards that overall average. So let's say you ended with 91%. That's an A minus. You did the extra credit. I see that column right next to your final average. I'm going to add 2 points to that in my head. Okay, this is really 93. 93 is an A. So what this extra credit assignment is it's a quiz. I put quiz in quotes because it's not the same as the other quizzes. This one basically just goes through and asks some questions about syllabus type information. Things about grading breakdown, rules, policies, procedures, things we're covering in this video, as well as advice on how to be successful in this course. Now, the best thing about this extra credit is you can attempt this quiz as many times as you want in order to get a perfect score, which is 2 out of 2. The computer is only going to save your highest score. So if you accidentally get one wrong, you didn't ruin it, you could just take it again and make sure you have maximized your extra credit. So this is the only extra credit that's available, and it happens early in the semester. Don't miss out on it. Make sure you're taking advantage of it. There will not be other extra credit opportunities. This is the only extra credit opportunity that we have available. Make sure you're getting that extra credit. The extra credit isn't magic. It's not going to change a final average of 47% into something passing. What the extra credit does is if you're close to the next letter grade, those 2 percentage points are going to get you up to that next letter grade. Those 2 points can change that 69D to a 71C. It can change that 80B minus to an 82B. It can change that 91A minus to a 93A. If you're close to that next letter grade, that extra credit ends up getting you there. So you want to make sure you take advantage of that. So those were all things about how your grades calculated, the types of assignments and that sort of thing. What I want to talk about next are some of our policies and procedures. So for us, our policies and procedures, late work is just not accepted. The only time, and this is rare, that late work is ever going to be accepted is for a serious medical or emergency situation. This isn't an I'm feeling kind of under the weather type thing. Can I submit something late? The answer is no. Don't wait until the end to try to get things done. This is, hey, I got admitted to the hospital for a couple days. That's a serious medical situation. Only serious things are going to be allowed for late work, and it is definitely going to require written documentation. And there's no such thing as a little bit late or a lot bit late. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's 1 second late, 1 minute late, 1 hour late. That assignment is not going to be accepted. It's your responsibility to manage your due dates, manage your time, manage the other things that are happening in your life to make sure things get submitted on time. Quizzes and exams have to be finished and submitted before the due dates to be accepted. It's not, oh, I started it before the due date, or I started it on time, I just didn't submit it on time. You have to be finished by the time that is due. Every assignment in this course can be completed early. Those due dates that you see on the calendar for every assignment, that is the slowest pace, the absolute slowest pace you should be working. You should be submitting things in advance of that. If you wait until the last day to complete an assignment, you're taking a big chance. Something comes up. Things are busy at work. You're having technology issues at home. That's a risk you put yourself in by waiting until the last minute. Do not procrastinate. Okay. Procrastination is the #1 reason why someone is not successful in this course. Don't let it happen to you. Technology issues, work issues, family issues, minor illnesses are not accepted reasons for late work. Why? Because you waited till the end and then life happened. Well, you brought that upon yourself. That's not an emergency. That is something you set up for yourself by procrastinating. Do not procrastinate. Work ahead of the schedule. So there's zero tolerance for academic integrity violations. The primary reason for someone to take this specific chemistry class is to enter a medical or healthcare related profession. These professions require integrity to the highest possible level because patients' lives are on the line. Academic integrity violations, I will prosecute to the highest extent allowed in Brookdale's academic integrity code, which includes automatic failure for the course. There's not going to be any second chances on this. It is your responsibility to ensure that your work is your own. Everything you submit, whether it's a lab report, whether it's an answer on a quiz or an exam, everything you submit is automatically scanned by Canvas software, checking for academic integrity issues. Additionally, I'm pretty good at spotting things that just aren't original work. Okay? So there is zero tolerance for this at any level. Your work needs to be your work and your work alone. It is your responsibility to ensure everything you submit is 100% your own original work. So my office hours will always be posted in Canvas right there in that welcome module. The chemistry department also offers tutoring September through June. Fortunately, there are no tutoring available during July or August, but September through June, there's also departmental tutoring that's available. Their schedules usually get finalized about a week into the semester. As soon as that's finalized, I end up posting that in the welcome module as well. So these are opportunities for you to get live synchronous help, an actual dialogue with someone, whether it's a remote live dialogue or an in-person dialogue on campus. It's really important that you get help as soon as possible if you are struggling or having problems. Chemistry doesn't let you catch up if you've fallen behind. You have to make sure you don't fall behind. Quickest and easiest way of making sure of that is as soon as there's some struggles, you have to reach out for help. I should always be your first resource for help. Many questions, problems can get addressed quickly and asynchronously through Canvas messaging. So asynchronous means not live. That's like an email or Canvas messaging. That's asynchronous. That's not live, but a lot of your issues can get addressed with very easily and very quickly if you recognize it, right away. Send a Canvas message. Hey, Bill, on this presentation at the 23rd minute mark, when you're doing this example, why did you do this instead of that? That's something I can try to address to you asynchronously because we're on Canvas so much. Now, that doesn't mean we can't, talk about it live during an office hour or another time, but you should always try to see if we can deal with your specific question asynchronously first. I'm on Canvas at least once per day. So you're going to hear back from me pretty quickly. Remember, procrastination is the #1 reason why someone is not successful in this course. I'm here to help you in learning the material. However, I'm also not going to do anything that promotes you procrastinating on the material. So what does that mean? That means I'm not going to address any question for an assignment on the day that that assignment is due, because that's just promoting procrastination. For a lab report, you need to look at that in advance of the due date. I'm not going to take questions on lab number 7 the day lab number 7 is due, because that means you waited till the end. You put yourself in a bad situation for dealing with that. Be sure that you have looked at labs and other assignments well before the due date to ensure that if there's any problems, I can help you get through them. Do not wait until the end in order to, try to submit an assignment. Look at things in advance. Older editions of the textbook are okay in terms of their content, but the problem with trying to use an older edition of the textbook is it's not going to match up with the syllabus. Chapter numbers are going to be different. Page numbers are going to be different. Problem numbers are going to be different. So an older edition of the textbook just doesn't really work for you. After you submit a quiz or an exam, the computer will attempt to automatically grade the entire exam. It'll even try to grade some free response questions. The computer is not perfect. It's not able to grade free response questions. The computer cannot accurately grade any sort of free response questions. I manually grade each and every quiz and exam after the due date. So what does that mean? That means you don't have to message me after you complete an exam that the computer marked something wrong. Well, it's okay. Every single quiz, every single exam, I manually grade after that due date has expired to fix anything the computer did not grade or graded incorrectly. Meaning, if you misspell a word, well, guess what? The computer sees that as wrong. I understand that you understood the material and that it's truly correct. Or you made something plural, or you used a synonym for a term instead of the term that the computer was looking for. I'm going to grade that correctly, even though the computer cannot. So quizzes and exams are required to be completed in one sitting. You cannot open them and then come back to them later. Don't start a quiz or an exam until you are ready to complete that quiz or that exam. So the next thing we want to talk about is probably the most important thing in this document and in this video, and that's some tips and advice on how to be successful in this course. And it's not just for being successful in this course. This can apply to a lot of your other science and math courses as well. First thing is it requires a minimum of 150 hours of focused work to be successful in this course. Well, where did that number come from? We didn't just randomly pick a number. That 150 hours is if you were in a face-to-face class during a long 15-week semester. You would have 3 hours of lecture, 3 hours of lab, and then it would be expected that you would do a minimum of 4 hours of work on your own outside of class, reading the textbook, trying problems, studying, memorizing different pieces, working on problems, working on questions. So 10 hours a week times 15 weeks, that's where that 150 hours come from. And that's generally considered a minimum to be able to spend 4 hours outside of class per class every week. Well, what does that kind of mean for us? Well, even though you're not in a traditional face-to-face class where you're in laboratory for a set amount of 3 hours, you're in lecture for a set amount of 3 hours every week, you're still having to spend that same time. And that accounts to a minimum of 150 hours. So in a 15-week semester, it's a minimum of 10 hours per week to get up to 150. If you're in an 11-week accelerated semester, that's 14 hours a week at a minimum. It could take more. 10-hour semester, it's 15 hours a week. If you're taking this in a super accelerated summer semester, it's potentially a 6-week semester. That means 25 hours per week in order to hit your 150 minimum hours. And it's not just that total amount of time of 150 hours. It has to be broken up pretty evenly. It's important that you spend that time each and every week. Remember, procrastination is the number one reason why someone would not be successful. Spending a very little time one week and trying to make up for it the following weeks is not going to be a winning strategy. It doesn't work. It leads to falling behind. And once you're falling behind, it is extraordinarily difficult to try to catch up. That's why the best thing to do is to make sure you haven't fallen behind in the first place. Each week, count out your minimum number of hours and make sure you're spending at least that minimum of hours every week. The trap a lot of people fall into is they don't spend enough time early on in a unit, and then they try to spend a whole lot of time the last week before an exam comes up. That doesn't work here. It's not going to be successful. You're going to be behind and you're not going to catch up successfully. So to be successful, you should be using the same techniques that you would do in a face-to-face class. And the sequence for success in a face-to-face class is to first read the textbook, then go to lecture, and then practice the problems. Well, what does that mean for us in this online class? Well, you should still read the chapters from the textbook for every unit. That should be your first exposure to the content. And it's okay if it doesn't make perfect sense when you read through it. That's okay. It's your first exposure to the material. At this stage, the goal isn't to understand things perfectly. It's just to get exposed to that material. That doesn't mean you're skim reading it. I mean, skim reading is not reading. Skim reading is randomly looking at pages. You're actually reading it, but you don't get stressed if something doesn't make sense. You shouldn't be, oh, I didn't understand section 6.2. I better read it and read it again and reread it and reread it and reread it. That's not what we're saying. We're saying read it once thoroughly, not skim, but read it just once. It's okay if it doesn't make sense. You're going to have more opportunities to deal with that material. So after you've read that material, second thing you would do is attend lecture. Well, we don't have a traditional lecture. For us, in this asynchronous online course, you're watching the videos that have been prepared for you. Remember, first read the textbook, and then you want to watch the video. There's a mistake that many online students make. And the mistake that gets made is that they're watching the videos in too casual of a setting, too casual of an environment. They're in their bed, they're on their couch. Maybe they have a beverage next to them. They have their pet nearby, maybe even the TV's playing in the background. That's not going to be successful. You want to put yourself in an actual environment where you can absorb what's happening in that video lecture. So that means you should be watching the videos in a distraction-free environment, not with people coming and going, not with music on in the background, not with a TV show on in the background. It should be at a desk or a table, just like if you're in a face-to-face lecture, you would be at a desk or a table. You should also be actively taking notes during the video. Too often people just watch the video, kind of like it's a movie. That's not going to be successful. You should be taking notes as you're watching that video the same way you would be taking notes if you're in a face-to-face lecture. And I can't recommend this enough. Definitely do this. What you should do to force yourself to take notes in the best possible way is to print out the slides in advance. So all of the PowerPoint slides are in files that you can print out in advance. Then take your notes directly on them. Remember, your notes just aren't writing down what's on the screen or what's on the piece of paper. Your notes are your notes. What's making sense for you? Sometimes it's a little note or a thought that says, I don't understand why we did this instead of that. That way, okay, if it doesn't make sense after you've looked at it again, you can say, you can send me that Canvas message. You can come to one of my office hours and say, hey, I didn't understand at this point why this happened instead of going about it another way. That is much, much easier if you have those slides printed out in advance where you're taking notes, not just on what I have written, but maybe what I've said, an example I've used, an analogy I've used, or something that for you, you know, hey, if I write this down, that's going to make it click much better for me. And print them out full size. Don't print them out, 8 slides on a single page. You can't take notes on that. You spend a lot of money for this course. Don't try to save a couple dollars on printing and ink be the reason that you're not successful. Print them out full size, take your notes directly on them. For some units, this could be applied to all units, but especially the last two, this is critically important for units 4 and 5. It can be useful to use multiple different colored pens, pencils, markers, highlighters to organize your notes. You'll see that in the video lectures, a lot of times I'm using colors to try to tie two things together. That can also help when you are taking notes as well. So when you're watching the videos, you're not just passively watching the videos. Take active notes while you are doing that. The next thing you would want to do is practice doing problems to ensure that you have mastered the material. This is another common error that many students fall into, and that is just not doing enough problems. What ends up happening is they're watching the videos and they're feeling good about what's on the video. The material in a video may look straightforward as you're being guided through it. That doesn't mean it will necessarily be easy later on when you try to do that independently. Just watching something done doesn't ensure that you can then do that thing. The only way to ensure that you have learned the material is to independently complete problems without referring back to, a resource, a textbook, notes, a video. And the first problems you should try independently are the ones in the video themselves, because you're being walked through them. So instead, when you first start practicing problems, go do the ones in the video again. Rewrite the problem on a separate piece of paper. Don't watch the video. Don't relook at the PowerPoint slides. Then try to do that without looking at any of your resources. After you're starting to feel a little bit comfortable doing those that you've seen in the video, then you move along to try textbook problems. And then after those, you can then also do, some topics have some supplemental problems that I have supplied in Canvas. You have to practice doing the problems, dealing with the material before you get to the exam. The mistake people always make is they watch the videos, they say, hey, that's great, I can do that, I understand that. Then an exam comes and turns out they can't do that because they never practiced doing that independently. Chemistry gets learned by doing problems. To kind of give you an analogy, I would liken this a little bit to art. I am a terrible artist. I cannot draw very well at all. Even if I were able to watch, if I could resurrect Da Vinci, Picasso, some great Renaissance artist, me just watching them paint or draw might help my abilities a little bit, but the only way I would ever improve my art, improve my drawing, my sketching, my painting, would be to actually practice doing that. It takes actual practice. Looking at something is not going to ensure that you can then later do it. You have to ensure you're able to do it well before you take a quiz or an exam. So another common mistake that gets made is how you end up spending your studying time. Science and math courses are different than humanities and social science classes. In humanities and social science classes, success can be achieved through mostly passive studying techniques. In a little bit, we'll talk about passive versus active studying. To be successful in science and math courses, a larger percentage of time should be spent using active study techniques as opposed to passive study techniques. My recommendation, 75% of your work time should be active, 25% should be passive. Let's talk about what we mean by active versus passive. So passive versus active studying. So passive studying involves activities where you're passively absorbing, receiving information from another source. So examples include reading or rereading a section of the textbook, rewatching a video, reviewing notes, reviewing PowerPoint slides. Those are all passive studying techniques. You're trying to passively absorb information from another source. If you contrast that to what we mean when we say active study, active studying involves activities where you are the principal doer of the activity. You're not passively receiving it, you're the principal participant. What does that mean? So examples would be independently doing problems. You can look at a question or a problem that was done in the notes or a video. That's all fine and good, but that's passive. What's much better is to actively try to do that problem or that question without using any resource. That's active study. You can maybe spend 10 minutes looking at 4 examples of something. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get it. It's much better to spend those 10 minutes trying to independently do one problem, because that's going to then show you, yes, I can do this type of material, or no, I still need some work in order to do that type of material. Other forms of active studying would be explaining a concept or idea to someone else, friend, family member. It doesn't even have to be to a person that understands chemistry. If you can explain it to someone else, you understand it pretty well. So instead of, reviewing information from notes or PowerPoints or rewatching a video, can you take that same diagram or idea and talk through it on your own to someone else? Even if they don't understand it, the person you're trying to explain it to, that's okay, because you will then be able to recognize, wow, I didn't really explain that very well. Or, yes, I explained that very well. Those are all active studying techniques. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do any passive studying. It takes some of both. But the mistake that people make is relying too much on passive studying and not enough on active studying. 75% active, 25% passive. It's still useful to reread a small section of textbook, rewatch a portion of a video, review your notes, relook at PowerPoint slides. Those are all good activities, but they don't replicate actively engaged with the material. So most of your time should be spent actively engaged with the material, a smaller amount of your time passively engaged with the material. So another common error that students make is at certain times there's just memorized pieces of information that you just have to have a handle on. You can't delay or procrastinate working on those memorized pieces of material. Just some examples through the first couple units. So these would be the metric prefixes and the elements and symbols in Unit 1, polyatomic ions and molecular prefixes in Unit 2. Any sort of material that you're asked to memorize, you should be trying to deal with that as soon as possible. Because for us, it's not just memorizing the material. Memorizing random facts doesn't get you anywhere in any discipline. The reason why you were asked to memorize those specific facts is not just to memorize that abstract information, but because then we're going to use that information to answer questions, solve problems. But in order to use it, you first have to memorize those core facts. In many cases, you first have to memorize the facts in order to use those facts in order to solve problems. Kind of an analogy I would give to you from your past is if you think back to grade school, second, third, fourth grade, you memorized the multiplication table. And you probably did that with flashcards. Teacher, your parent, or you would practice, you'd see those multiplication tables. 6 times 6, 36, 8 times 8, 64, 7 times 7, 49, 7 times 5, 35. And you would memorize those multiplication facts. Well, it didn't end there. You had to first memorize those core facts because then you were going to use those in the future to actually solve mathematical problems. The same thing happens with the material you're learning here. You need to memorize those metric prefixes so then you can use that memorized fact in order to solve an actual problem. Same thing with some of these other memorized pieces. So don't delay on those. You want to get a handle on those as soon as you can in any specific unit. And it's going to be real clear what pieces those are. A lot of times they're listed in the department syllabus. A lot of times in the video, I'm talking about them. In the kind of study guide for the various units, it's kind of clear, hey, you're going to be using those. There should never be a doubt of, hey, should I have that memorized? It's going to be pretty clear of what you have to have memorized. So to be successful, it's all about getting yourself on a good schedule and a good sequence. Read the textbook just once. Watch those videos while actively taking notes and actively engage with them, and then do problems. and then repeat that process. Read that textbook, watch those videos, do problems. And if you go through that sequence, you're going to learn very on in a unit what pieces of that unit are going good. Hey, I got those pieces. What parts of that material are still giving you a little bit trouble, where, hey, I just need to spend more time dealing with it. And what pieces of that material you're really, really kind of struggling with. Those are the ones that you then have to reach out and say, hey, Bill, I'm really struggling with these type of problems, this question, where you can get some help. But you got to do that on a time scale that's not right before an exam or right before something's due, because that's not enough time to get that fixed. So that's your recipe for success in this course, is you have to make sure you're spending those minimum hours each week on the material. First, read through the textbook. Second, watch those videos. 3, practice doing problems. That's the key. Are you doing assignments in there as well? Yes, you're completing labs in there. You're completing the participation assignments in there. You're taking quizzes in there, but in terms of your own preparation, it's read, watch those videos, try doing problems, and then repeating that sequence. And then saying, for each piece of content that you have in a chapter or a unit, you should kind of have it placed in one of 3 categories. Category 1 is, I feel real comfortable with that. I've practiced doing problems and I can independently do them. Second category is, I'm doing okay on those. I still sometimes make a mistake. I'm not perfect. I'm not great on that yet, but I'm getting there. Well, those are just things that you need to spend a little bit of time still practicing. You need to do some more problems, spend a little bit more time working on that. Then there's the third category of, you've tried to do problems, you've tried some things, but you are really struggling. At that point, you have to say, hey, I recognize I'm struggling, and then reach out and getting that help in a timely manner, early enough that you have time to get that resolved, time to have some interactions with me where I can kind of set you on the right path. And that doesn't happen the day of an exam or the day before an exam. If you're struggling with something, you have to recognize that right away so you can get timely help and get through that material. So that's how you're going to be successful with the material. Read, watch videos actively, and then practice doing questions and problems. And repeating that cycle is your recipe for success.